Okay.
I still feel confused about what is the connection? How do we decriminalize midwifery? So like, you said there are some states where midwifery isn't illegal.
Right.
Let's leave it that way. Mm-hmm. What then is the purpose of licensure in a state where midwifery already isn't illegal? And for those purposes, there's no need to change the law, to decriminalize.
Correct.
So
there's no need to decriminalize, but there is no reason not to pass laws that construct a system for professional midwives who by acquiring a certain training, going to a school and passing that school and taking an exam, then get licensed by the state, and those midwives have the ability to be hired by hospitals,
okay,
to be hired by clinics, to be hired by junior colleges to teach programs either in midwifery or nursing, maternity nursing, for example. They have skills like suturing. There are places where midwives, nurse midwives in particular, certain states where they actually are allowed to use a vacuum extractor. There are places, hospital-based midwives that manage epidurals. They don't insert the epidural, but they can, bump it up if the mother needs some more. Make that decision to give her more. That there's a whole nother layer of what professional education, and the structure, the regulatory structure that has oversight and accountability. That, for example, that if as a licensed midwife or a professional midwife, there's a complaint against you, that complaint will be handled through an administrative process, a regulatory agency and an administrative process, rather than having somebody go to the district attorney and criminally prosecute you. That's a benefit to the midwife. Mm-hmm. That we don't want to casually criminalize people because there aren't any other options. Here I'm not in California right now, but in California, the medical board have no authority over an unlicensed midwife. If you're an unlicensed midwife and there's a bad outcome or a problematical outcome, or there's somebody that's just pissed off at you, they paid you a lot of money and they didn't think they got their money's worth, you have to go to the DA and criminally prosecute that midwife. So I don't see those things as incompatible at all. So to some extent, I'm having a hard time answering your question because they were never incompatible in my mind. So in those states where we've made midwifery an illegal practice of medicine, where we say if you're not licensed as a midwife, then whatever you're doing, we're going to call it an illegal practice of medicine, we need the law to change that. To say that the practice of midwifery is the practice of midwifery, it is not the practice of medicine. And that it is not a crime to provide care to a healthy woman during a normal childbirth, whether or not you have any particular credentials, as long as you are completely honest with the woman. Mm-hmm. That there's complete, and I keep coming back to saying that licensing, but remember that licensing except nowadays, licensing almost always is the end of a process that started with education. That you're not just signing up for a license like you go down to get a fishing license. You don't have to prove anything to get a fishing license. But if you want to get a motorcycle license, you have to learn how to ride a motorcycle and take a test. So, but the thing is that you learned how to do the thing before you took the test, and then you get the license. So that's what I see as the professional process. The professional license assumes that you got educated, and that we know that you went to school, and we know that you paid attention because you were able to pass the test at the end of it all. You graduated from your program, and then you passed a state licensing board exam, and now you're doing your thing. And in some places, California being one of them, you take a certain number of of continuing medical education, or continuing whatever they call it, CEUs, continuing educational units. I don't see why everybody has to get crazy over that. I mean, I am from a very religiously fundamentalist background that has a lot of beliefs about people being responsible for themselves. But when I got on that airplane to fly here to your house, I wanted to be sure that the people, you know, that there was some process for making sure that they really made sure that there was gas and oil in the plane and air in the tires before we took off. I want those guys that service the airplane, I want them to know what they're doing. I want them to be trained. I want that pilot. Is there a problem having a pilot have a pilot's license? I don't think so. At least there wasn't for me. And actually, they have a whole lot more lives in their hands than midwives have, from that standpoint. And they were like, I don't know, there were like 300 people on that plane. It was like really big and really full. Was a lot of responsibility. Anyway, my point is that I would use that sort of fundamental democratic principles, these fundamental democratic principles that to be an active citizen and make sure to be part of that process that gets the laws changed, and that those regulations that happen afterwards, you go to those hearings, you testify, you know the people. Somebody in your group needs to connect over a long enough period of time that there's some what you call institutional memory, that it is I truly believe that it is an aspect of midwifing. I don't see that much difference between sitting on the floor next to the bathtub and pouring water over the belly of one of my pregnant women during a contraction than I do sitting in a medical board meeting and watching those people up there, kind of like argue with each other about something. And occasionally getting up and saying, "Excuse me, but have you thought about so-and-so?" I think we're supposed to be there and be part of it rather than to kvetch and complain and to allow our imagination to run wild with us. We heard about somebody that got, just knowing the real facts, or actually here's like a whole separate little category here, is that there's far too much of taking what is truly not much more than gossip and running with it. And I'm including doctors too. Doctors do this too. But midwives do it really badly as well. Is that somebody told them that somebody else heard, and when you actually, and I'm talking both from the standpoint of a birth that there was some controversy about or some issue with, and whether or not there is a legal issue for a midwife. That when you actually read the documents, and I do that as an expert witness, when you actually read what happened, you go, oh my God. It had nothing to do with all these midwives, all these emails that are going back and forth, and can you believe it? And what that means, and then they're going to come for us, and they're going to take our dog away from us. Some kind of weird, story about how, it's the end of the world. And then it turns out it isn't the end of the world. And a lot of times when people get arrested or they get prosecuted or they get, their license gets, they're being disciplined by a regulatory agency, when you actually know the facts, you go, well, come to think of it, that actually was kind of a dumb idea. The reason that you're in trouble is because your judgment wasn't so great. Now, does that mean you're a horrible, bad person and you should never practice again? Maybe not. Probably not. But the people really I consider it to be an aspect of our ethical obligation to not go crazy with things that you hear until you actually find out what the real, actual, honest-to-God deal is from the real people, or read the real documents, or go to the hearing yourself. Actually find out what's really going on, and you will find out that there are not nearly as many boogeymen out there as midwives. A lot of midwives seem to think that they're like all against us. They are powerful. The organized medicine. As a student of the history of that, my God, I can tell you stories that go on for hours about how powerful they have been. But in my life, I have had my experience, my intellect, my willingness to persevere has been enough to be able to push back in a way that successfully influenced the outcome. We want the river to go just a little to the left or a little to the right to make it work better for us. And I am living proof that you can do that. It can be done. There isn't any reason for us to all, be weeping and wailing and have our undies in a bunch and running around like chickens with their head cut off, the hair on fire stories. We just need to get down to brass tacks and get it done. We need licensing in states that don't have it. That doesn't mean that the license has to make the practice of midwifery illegal without it. You have to acknowledge within the license. For example, our midwifery licensing law acknowledges that there is a thing called nurse midwifery, and that nothing in that law is to in any way make the practice of nurse midwifery different or illegal or anything else like that. You can do exactly that with any licensing law. So, and actually lawyers are pretty good at that kind of language. That's one of those things that would take you 5 minutes to Google to come up with reasonably good language for. It's not rocket science. So, anyway, how many minutes do we have left?
Well, this is counting up, so we've got 11:26 that we've gone in on this last one. Your battery is showing red.
Okay, well that means is that we may run out of tape at about the same time that we run out of so you say it's counting up.
Well, it's saying 11:42, 43, 44, 40. So it's not showing me how many minutes we have left. It's showing how many minutes we've taped.
Well, we certainly taped more than 11 minutes.
Yeah, because we
that's
stopped
because
it
you
a
turned
number
it
of
off.
times.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
all right. So that is not actually telling us
I bet
how
we
much.
have 10 or 15 left.
Okay.
Because I think when I started it was at like 28
Okay.
or something like that.
All right. Okay. So, anything else that we should wander into?
I'm wondering if there would be anything that you would say to women who feel resistant to, I'm talking as women as consumers.
Yeah, the consumer
who
end of it.
feel resistant to this because they're afraid, maybe they're a VBAC mom.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're worried, for instance, in my state, we're working on getting licensure.
Mm-hmm.
And, like you talked, this is kind of a two-pronged process. You get the licensure, then you figure out the nitty-gritty details about the regulation and what all those stipulations are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Which to me, as a consumer, is a little bit unnerving.
Mm-hmm.
To push for licensure and not know what the details may or may not be is pretty scary. And so, some women in states where they already have really restrictive things like no VBACs and
Mm-hmm.
they don't have VBAC options,
Mm-hmm.
no twins, no breaches, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a scary thing either if you're already in a state or you're living in
Mm-hmm.
a state where you've got this ambiguity. So what would you say to women who kind of have that fear or that are feeling that resistance because of those potential restrictions?
Well, first I would have to say that for a lot of women, they are not in a position to be political activists. They are not going to. I mean, one of the things to say to people is, well, you should be at the party. You should be at the hearings. You should speak up. You should write letters. You should make sure that your legislator knows that you're paying attention. But frankly, there are a lot of women who their temperament, their lifestyle, that something about that, they're just never really going to be activists. I'm not sure that you can say too much about that. There's too much that could be said that would somehow or another assuage their concerns. Generally, a scope of practice, a general scope of practice, for example, will say something like, that midwives provide care for spontaneous vaginal birth, for spontaneous childbirth. And then later on, someone else comes along at another time and wants to define that more. And everybody has to work to make sure that those definitions are consistent. and that again, you're not, I mean, we talk about the decriminalization of midwifery, but frankly, the more pertinent conversation here is about the criminalizing of forms of care. For example, for the licensed midwife to provide care to a VBAC mother, as one example, in an out-of-hospital setting. I want to make sure that we continue to remember that all forms of professional midwives should be in hospitals. That it's a kind of a false distinction to say, in other words, what's not being said in that language that you just quoted is in an out-of-hospital setting. No VBACs in an out-of-hospital setting. So fine. So that's a state that needs to say. However, our licensed midwives have hospital privileges, and so you have to that service needs to be available to childbearing women by midwives. If you want to, if the wisdom of the legislature, of the people, whatever you want to call it, is that midwives shouldn't attend VBACs at home, then you have to have those midwives attend VBACs in the hospital. So the better option for those things is to require fully informed consent and to ultimately have it be the mother's choice. It is the mother's choice to have an unattended birth. It is not illegal any place in the United States. There is one place somewhere in this area in the Midwest here, which is either Indiana, Ohio, or Illinois, probably not Illinois, where it is illegal for the father to catch the baby. That law needs to go away too, by the way. But the point is that it's not illegal for the mother to have no prenatal care and to have no one present at the birth. It is possible for the legal system to declare that to be after the baby gets born, if there's an issue or problem, for them to claim that was medical neglect. But up front, the mother gets to make that choice. And so if she can make that choice, in fact, in many places, she can choose A, to not get pregnant, and B, to terminate a pregnancy. So somehow or another, I'm unimpressed with the idea that when we get all the way out, here's a woman who's been pregnant for 9 months, and we say to her, now the one thing you can't do is have a VBAC. We won't let your midwife attend you, and our hospitals don't do VBACs. So the only way you can have a VBAC is you have an unattended birth at home, because that'll make VBAC a whole lot safer. VBAC is so risky that we want you to have, or that what we give you, we don't want you to, but what we give you is your only other option to an elective cesarean is an unattended birth at home. Now that is just plain crazy, And when things are just plain crazy, I think we have an obligation as citizens of a democracy to put on our britches and go to and show up, to suit up and show up and play the game called politics, called democracy. So that's my best shot at it. So we're probably pretty close.
Yep.